Welcome to Lesson 9 in Through the New Testament in Ancient Greek for Absolute Beginners. My name is Helene Istay, and I'm your guide as we read through the New Testament in its original beautiful language, the language of ancient Greece, which coincidentally was called Hellenistay. Because each lesson will build on previous lessons, be sure to start with Lesson 1. Let's get going. Today we're going to read through Matthew 5, verses 13 through 20, which is a continuation of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus speaks about believers being salt and light and how he fulfills the law. And our topics today is we're going to be overviewing all parts of speech just so you are completely familiar with all the different ways that we form words and connect them together. And then we're going to do an introduction to present indicative active verbs. All right, we're going to talk about verbs in general, but I'm really going to focus on our present tense, indicative mood, active voice. And then we're going to talk about the present indicative of eİmί and the present indicative of luo. So let's get going. We're going to start off by reading about salt and light. Matthew 5, verse 13. Humes este ta halas tes geis, eande ta halas moranthe, entini alesthesetai, eis uden iskue eti, eime blethen exo katapatesthai, hupa ton anthropon. All right, so we're going to start off with 4 different parts of speech all together. This is kind of a good way to break down your Greek sentences. You kind of get an idea of what it's about when you start off with your nouns and articles, adjectives describing those nouns, and pronouns, which are basically nouns. They're just kind of shortcuts. So instead of saying the boy, you say he, that kind of thing. All right, so in this passage, in this verse, we have you, which is our subject. You can tell because it's nominative, second person plural, and it's a personal pronoun because it stands in for who Jesus is talking to, which is believers, people who trust in him as their savior. Humes. And then we have the salt of the earth. So we have salt, halas, and geis. Now, in this case, we're connecting you and salt with a verb that is indicating equality, basically. And so this is going to stay in nominative because it's equivalent to the subject. So that's called a predicate nominative. This is nominative, neuter, singular, the salt, ta halas. And of course, the article matches nominative, neuter, single. And then of the earth, is going to be partitive. So we belong to the earth. We are in the earth. So it's basically a genitive indicating belonging, possession. We're of the earth. Currently, in the future, will be of the heavens. So genitive feminine singular, article to match. And then, however, the salt becomes tasteless. Again, we have another subject, nominative, neuter, singular. And then we haven't talked about this type of pronoun yet, and we're going to wait until the future to go into more detail. But this is called an interrogative pronoun. So in this case, when you have an accent on the first syllable, we'll talk about this, it's a question. All right, so it's indicating that Jesus here is asking a question. What are you going to give the salt back some taste with? So basically, back in those days, they used a crystal for salt they found in the Dead Sea. And it contained a lot of different minerals, but it was salty. But after a while, that mineral would kind of lose its salt. It would have other minerals in it, but not the NaCl or the sodium chloride. Today, we have salt that's just pure sodium chloride. But back then, you could have salt that lost its saltiness. So what will it be salted with? So here, let's move on. Not too much detail. I want to keep this fairly brief. All right, and this is an adjective meaning nothing. So you might think of it as a noun. In this case, it is a noun. It's a substantive adjective. So it stands in for, it's good for nothing, basically. Uden. And then over here, by men. So in English, we wouldn't have the article, but in Greek, you want to clarify that it's by the men. So hupa, ton, anthropone. So this preposition is followed by the genitive when it's by. So that's pretty much logical because usually by or of would be a genitive type of idea. All right, now let's take a look at all of our little words that stay the same. They don't change depending on part of speech, whether it's a nominative or genitive. These guys are adverbs, conjunctions, and prepositions. Always stay the same. We love these guys. All right, if is aeon. De basically is just kind of indicating some sort of continuation of the previous thought. So it could be and, it could be but, it could be however, it could be then, it could be now. I mean, really you have to tell by the context. And then with, in this case, en. So there's different meanings or different ways you can say with, but in this case, with what is in what. In Greek, you would say in what will it be salted? So using what? So en teeny, remember en followed by the dative. I'm in a relationship, I date. There's another preposition, ace. This one is followed by the accusative. I always think of ace in the hall, ACE, which makes me remember it's accusative. All right, and then eti, no longer, or any longer in this case. It's not potent any longer. So once the salt, that crystal that they used to use, loses its saltiness, it's no longer strong, and it's good for nothing. And then if not, here we can also say except. So except, it's only good for being cast out on the ground, basically, to be trampled. Exo, so cast out. So in this case, we're going to use this in addition to it being cast out. And then by men, again, we have the genitive following the by. In this case, it's hupa instead of apa. Different ways of saying by. All right, let's look at, this is our last overview of this verse. I'm going to introduce verbs really quickly here. I put a little definition up here so you kind of know what a verb is if you aren't sure. But basically, anything when you want to express existence or an action or an occurrence, it's basically the active part of the sentence, what's happening. So in this case, we have you are, and are, this is an existence. You are. So we already talked about how this is it shows equality between the subject and the predicate nominative. So that's a verb. We're going to talk more about this verb to be shortly, so hang in there. Moronte, becomes tasteless. We will get into more of this later, but this is actually what's called an aorist subjunctive passive. Wow, that's that's going to be further down the road. We'll talk about that. And then will be salted, alesthesitai, is future indicative passive. Don't worry if you don't understand these terms. Iskue, here is another PIA. We love our PIA, present indicative active. For now, we're just going to talk about present. That means it's happening now. Or it's a general truth, like you are. So you are the salt of the earth right now, but this is more of a statement of a general truth. And it's not potent any longer. So this is a present tense. It's like after it loses its saltiness, this crystal is not potent. It's currently not the case. So it's also kind of a general truth. So iskue, that comes from the verb iskuo, which notice they always use the present tense first person singular. We'll talk about that in the future, but I'll give you a little bit more of that when we get to the to be. This means to be strong, to have power. We don't really have an exact equivalent in English, but so the salt, or the crystal in this case, is not strong. So it's ace uden. It's not good for anything anymore. So it's not strong for anything. It's not useful for anything, basically. And then we have an example here of an infinitive, katapatesthai. Now, in English, our infinitives start with to. So to trample. And in this case, it's passive. And here we call it middle passive. We'll explain that in the future. But that means to be trampled upon. So instead of to trample, you have to be. That's passive. The action is happening to the subject instead of the subject doing the action. So here it's present. And this N stands for infinitive, and it's middle/passive voice. And don't worry, we will get into that later, but I just want to give you some idea of what these little letters stand for. All right, let's read our next verse. verses. Actually, let's do 3 verses in this case. So verses 14 through 16 of Matthew 5. Humes este taphos tu kosmu, ou dunatai polis krubenai epano arus kemene, ude kaiusin luknan kaititheasin autan hupatan madian, alepiten luknian kailampe pasin tois en te oikia, hutos lampsato, taphos humon, emprosthen ton anthropon, hapos idosin humon, ta kala erga kai doxasosin tan patera humon tan en tois uranois. All right, busy slide here, but I think you guys are really familiar by now with nouns and their articles, and then the personal pronouns that kind of stand in for the actual idea. So you, instead of saying you believers, he just says you. So that's personal pronoun. Are the light of the world. So remember, light is neuter, and in this case it's nominative because it's a predicate nominative. It's equivalent because we're using the verb to be. The light of the world. Beautiful. And then, of course, the world is genitive because it's the light of the world, just like we're the salt of the earth. All right, polis, a city, is not able. And then here we have passive. We'll get to that in the verb section, but just wanted to point that out. To be hidden. When you see something that's, instead of to hide, it's to be hidden, that would be passive. So polis is the subject here. And then a hill is arus. Arus. And then in this case, it's on a hill. We'll talk about why that when we talked about our prepositions soon. Luknan. This is the object of the verb light, so it's in the accusative. And then here it's auton. Put it. So you put it, in this case, it's a personal pronoun that refers to the lamp. The lamp is masculine, so it matches accusative masculine sing. And in this case, it's third person singular. We're talking with personal pronouns. You have first and second, like I and you. So in this case, we have to specify that it's an object that's not I or you. Under a basket is ton madian, accusative, and then upon the lampstand is tain luknian, and that's again going to be accusative because it's following a p. And then those in the house. So this is pretty much standing for the people in the house. So it's kind of, you're using this article as a personal pronoun. Te oikia is the dative of the house. Taphos humon is your light. Remember, we use both the article and this personal pronoun genitive to show it's your light. And then before men would be ton anthropon with genitive. And then your good works would be humon, ta, kala erga. I was going to put adjectives in here too. I forgot to circle this one, but kala is good. So erga, we get ergonomics from this word. And then tan patera, humon is your father with both the article and the personal pronoun in the genitive. And then here's our reuse of the article to kind of tag on. It's like a little piece of glue that says this next phrase also applies to this tan patera himon, in the heavens. So your father in heaven. And then the little words that make us happy that don't ever change. They're always going to be the same form, except u becomes uk or uch, depending on if there's a vowel after it with either a smooth breathing mark or a rough breathing mark. But that's the only way this one changes. Okay, a city is not able. So you always use u or may before a verb if you want to negate it. And then on a hill, epano. So we could have say en, but epano is indicating kind of on top of. Nor ude. It's kind of like saying u followed by and not. So nor. We already know about kai, so there's our three kais in these verses. Hupa, under, followed by the accusative. In this case, under, hupa is sometimes followed by the genitive to indicate from, or by. But in this case, when you're talking about under something, you use accusative. Al. This one becomes Allah becomes al before a vowel, just so it flows more. Alepi. But. And then let's take a look at this preposition en. We know en is followed by the dative, so in the house. Thus, hutos, hutos. Lots of different, like hupos, hutos, those are a little bit confusing, but in this case it's thus. In other words, because of this, you don't want a lamp under a basket. You, therefore, should let your light shine before people. Like, don't hide yourself. Let your light shine. And then empros then is followed by the genitive before men. And again, we have something similar to hutos. You have hopos, so that. So thus and so that, very similar, and kind of a similar meaning. This indicates purpose, so that people will see your works and glorify your Father in heaven. All right, in the heavens, and followed by the dative. And finally, let's look at these verbs. Again, we have you are, este. Este means you all. So you all are the light of the world. So he's talking to all believers. And a city is not able, u dunatai. Notice this is also present, but it's middle passive. We'll talk about that in the future. Instead of active, it's middle passive. But don't worry about that right now. And then lying, here we have, this is a participle. In English, we usually have the ing for participles. And in Greek, there's a lot of different ways you can translate it. But the most simple one for us now is lying. And then do light. So in this case, you don't. Neither would you light a lamp and put it under a basket. You would put it on the lampstand. And then lampe. Here's pia, present indicative active, my favorite tense for beginners. Lampe sounds like lamp. That's where we get our word lamp, actually. It shines, present. See, that's a present, it's happening now, or it's a general truth. You put it on the lampstand so it shines. Let it shine. This is an imperative. And a really cool little factoid, we won't get into too much detail here, but we only have second person imperatives in English, like shine, shine your light. You're talking to another person. Here, this is actually a third person imperative, so it's really hard to translate into English. We usually just say, let the light shine. And then so that is going to be followed by what we call the subjunctive mood. And that's kind of more when something's not actually true and you just hope it's true. In this case, it's not hoping, it's basically claiming that if you do this, then this will happen. So irusin, and then doxasosin is another subjunctive. So that's another thing that kind of follows the conjunction hopos. All right, let's talk about eİmī. Eİmī is the verb, in English we would say to be, but the actual translation is I am, right? Because in Greek they always talk about the form of the verb, they usually put it in the first person singular, I am. So, but we would say to be for like the general meaning of the word. Eİmī, I am. A is you singular are. Estin, he, she, or it is, so that's the third person singular. And now plural, we are is esmen. And then you all are, which we saw in these verses, este, este. And then they are is esin or ac, but usually it's followed by this new. So I put the new in parentheses to indicate that sometimes you'll see it as ac. Most of all, it's esin. All right, so let me just give you an example of eİmī. This is John the Baptist speaking. I am not fit to carry the sandals of him. All right, so he's basically saying he is the one whose sandals I am not fit to carry. I am. In this case, I am not fit to carry is present indicative active. So that's a great example of I am. Here's an example, PIA, of second person singular. You are. Huios to theo. And the person who was saying this is the devil. So during the temptation of Jesus, it says, if you are the Son of God, you are is second person singular, A. And then here's an example from Matthew 1:20. So this is when the angel is speaking to Joseph, and assuring him that he can marry Mary because what has been conceived inside her, basically the baby Jesus, is from the Holy Spirit. This is another example of crazy weird Greek word order, but ek pneumatos estin hagiou, so is from the Holy Spirit, third person singular. And then we have an example. I couldn't find one in Matthew. In fact, the first time in the New Testament where the first person plural of to be is used is not until Mark 5:9. So this is when the man who is possessed by many demons tells Jesus his name. So my name, the name to me, is Legion, because we are many. And so here he's saying my name, singular, but here it says we are many. So it's kind of an interesting little contrast there, because the demons are speaking, but they're saying the name of the one singular man. My name is Legion. Legion was kind of a division of a Roman army where it's a lot of men. So that's why we are many. Polloi, esmen. We talked about polloi before. We are. And then second person plural we just talked about. But the first use in the New Testament is makarioi este. You are blessed when they insult you. Este. And it's second person plural. We can tell it's you all, not just you, singular. And finally, eisine. Eisine is used in Matthew 2:18 for the first time. Hati uk eisine. A really sad example, but this is when Rachel is crying for her children who are no more. So that was after Herod killed the baby boys, 2 years old and younger, in Bethlehem and its vicinity. So eisine there is the present indicative active third person plural. All right, let's read another 2 verses here. Me namisete hati elthan katalusai ta naman tus prophetas uk elthan katalusai Allah plerosai amen gar lego humin heos an parelthe ha uranas kai hege iota hen mia keraya ume parelthe apo tu namu heos an panta genetai. All right, let's look at the nouns and the articles and the adjectives here. So the law. So in this case, abolish is the verb, so the object is the law, which is why it's in the accusative masculine singular. Or the prophets. So this is basically talking about all the commandments, the law and the prophets. And the prophets is also accusative. In this case, it's plural. So the law is singular and prophets is plural. So you have tous prophetas. All right, and then the heaven. So the heaven will pass away. Ha uranas. And then the earth, I didn't circle, but the earth is feminine singular. And in this case, it's the subject will pass away. So it's also nominative. And then one iota. Now, iota is actually that letter in Greek, iota, just a tiny little line, and not even one iota. This adjective is the number 1, and it will change depending on the gender. Now, it's always singular because you can't have plural one, so that's helpful. We'll talk about more of this in the future, but this is a rough breathing mark, so it's hen. Not n, but hen. One iota, and an iota is neuter, so you have hen. And then here we have one again, but it's referring to karaya, which is feminine singular. So it changes from hen to mia. And if you're curious, one masculine is heis. It's kind of like ace, but with a rough breathing mark. So it's heis, mia, hen, masculine, feminine, and singular. And then from the law to namu. So here it's accusative, here it's genitive. And it's following apa, from, so that's genitive. And then everything, pasapan. So here we have everything, panta, which is nominative, neuter, plural. Everything, kind of a general reference to everything should happen. All right, so let's start here. May, remember we use ou or may to negate a verb. In this case, it's always before something that's not indicative, it's going to be may. In this case, it's subjunctive. Don't worry if you don't understand that, but we have may. And we have that, haughty. So that I have come to abolish. And or is a. So notice it's distinct from hey. This is a. Hey is the article the for feminine singular, nominative. And then ook, again, remember ook before before a soft breathing mark becomes ook. And before a rough breathing mark, it's with the key. And then Allah, gar. So this is very common for Jesus to say amen. Truly comes from Hebrew. Amen, gar lego humin. Truly I say to you. And then heos on. Heos here means until. And then on is what we call a particle. I put a little description of why on is used sometimes. We don't really use it in English, but it indicates something that is going to happen in the future, that is either a wish or a possibility or an uncertainty. Usually you don't translate it, but here in the future, the heaven and earth will pass away. Heos on. And then again, a for or. U may. All right. U and may next to each other is an emphatic negation. So you're saying there is no way that anything will pass away from the law. Absolutely not until all of this happens. So u may, emphatic negation. From the law, apa to namu. Heos on. Again, we have this on again. Everything should happen in the future. All right. And then our verbs here, just really quickly. Namisete is from the verb to think. I have come, eilthon, katalusai. This is an infinitive. I have come. This is a past tense. We call it aorist. So aorist, indicative, active. Here's another infinitive, katalusai. Plerosai is another infinitive to fulfill. And then lego is present, indicative, active, pia. Lego. And then we'll talk about this in the future, but subjunctive, subjunctive, subjunctive. So these are things that will happen sometime in the future. So we don't use the indicative in that case. All right, let's go ahead and read our last verses here. Has eon un luce, mion ton entelon, tuton ton elachiston, kai didaxe, hutos tus anthropous, elakistas klethesetai ente basileia ton uranon. Has dan poiese kai didaxe hutas megas klethesetai ente basileia ton uranon. Legogar humin hati eon me perisiuse humon he dikaiasune pleion ton grammateon kai pharasaion u me eis elthete eis ten basilean tu uranon. All right, really quick now, don't want to go too long. Whoever, this is a relative pronoun, nominative masculine singular. We'll talk about that in the future. One of the commandments, remember we have mia for feminine. So mian is the accusative of the commandments, is genitive plural. To ton elachiston, of the least. Here we have an adjective used as a noun. That's called a substantive use because it has substance more than just a description. All right, of the least. And then the others, so the other men in this case. So the other. So you're talking about teaching. These are going to be accusative, the object of teaching. The least he would be called, again, here we have elachiston. This one, person, singular, is the least. Again, a substantive use of an adjective. In the kingdom of the heavens, we have te basileia ton uranon, should be familiar to you by now. Hutas megas, he will be called great. So this one, we're going to talk about this, is called a demonstrative because you're demonstrating, you're pointing to someone in particular. And here, you, I say for you, basically, if you do not exceed in your righteousness, that of the scribes and the Pharisees. So your righteousness here is going to be nominative feminine singular. If your righteousness does not exceed, above that, pleion, ton grammateon, kai pharasaion, those are in genitive because it's that of that belongs to them, their righteousness. You will never, ever enter into the kingdom of the heavens. So we have the kingdom of heavens 3 times here. Emphasis, emphasis. All right, and then these are our favorite little words that don't change except before vowels sometimes, like D here. I'm not going to go into detail here, but just pointing them out, you should recognize all of these. Just want to point out that there is another emphatic negation. You will never, ever, ever enter into the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus is making it very clear that unless you have amazingly perfect righteousness, which none of us does, we will never go to heaven. So it's great to see this. We need Jesus to be our representative. We need to take his righteousness through faith alone. All right, and then the last thing, I'm not going to go through all these verbs here, but you'll see all the verbs. Here we have a verb that's from the present singular first person is luo. And in this case, it means to break the commandments. But in general, it's used to say to loose, like if you want to loose a prisoner, set him free, release, or dissolve, like dissolve a contract. In this case, that's kind of the meaning here. You're dissolving the commandment by breaking it. We're going to talk about the conjugation of luo next. Here's what I had before is luo is very simple. It's just 3 letters. And this last omega is the sign that it's present tense, first person singular. I loose, luo. You loose is lues. So you just change the ending to indicate second person singular, you loose. He, she, or it looses, it just is lue without the sigma. And then when you get to the plural, you have amen, luamen, luamen. Luete is you all loose. So notice there's a different form for singular you and plural you. And then luusin, or luusi, they loose. That brings us to the end of lesson 9. Thank you so much for joining me on this tour through the ancient Greek New Testament. See you next time.